The love for whiskey among us Indians is well established. In fact, we love the liquid so much that we literally consume the highest amount of it in the world. India has traditionally loved its whiskey cheap. While we are number one in volumes, our market value is a fraction of more developed markets in the West. But while we have never set much store by the quality of our tipple, that's changing. In fact, India took over France and became the largest market for Scotch imports from UK in terms of volume during FY23. The pandemic has resulted in a lot of changes in our drinking habits. Drinking at home in India has always been higher than drinking at bars and restaurants. But during the pandemic, we were not just drinking at home, but we were drinking better than ever. The newfound love for quality whiskey quickly replaced the blenders' prides of the country with the Red Labels, the Taliskers, the Lafroigs, and even the Yamazakis. In such a scenario, what happens when the largest beer brewer in the world decides to launch its first ever hard spirit, an American blended whiskey, in India? Let's find out. You are listening to The Morning Brief, and I'm your new host, Shobhari Das, and this is Friday on the 17th of February. We will dig deeper into the business of whiskey. Our guests today are Keshav Prakash, founder and curator, Walt Fine Home Bar; Arijit Bose, celebrity bartender and vertical head of the countertop division of Third Eye Distillery; and Vineet Sharma, head of marketing and trade marketing, AB InBev India. While Budweiser may not be my first choice of beer personally, Budweiser Magnum has been my go-to since its launch. AB InBev, the brewer behind the brands such as Bud, Hoegaarden, and Corona to name a few, launched American blended whiskey Magnum Double Barrel in India in November 2022. Magnum Double Barrel is an expensive whiskey, priced at Rs 2,800 in Maharashtra. While premium whiskeys are not a novelty in the country anymore, most Indians, when they think of expensive whiskey, we all know that they're talking about single malts. Personally, I'm the same. I mean, if you're going to do expensive whiskey, might as well do it with single malts, right? Before we begin, let's hear what India likes to drink when they choose to drink whiskey.
If I have to say my one go-to drink, it would be gin.
My go-to drink is whiskey, and I generally like single malt or Scotch whiskey.
I can have a beer when I'm too tired, and I can have whiskey when I'm home with my friends.
It's always a beer.
I am a big cocktail person.
I'm a social drinker, so whenever there's an occasion, I'll be drinking.
These are not for drinking. It is not meant to drink. It is only meant to drink water.
Homes are always like the best place to drink at.
I prefer drinking at a bar. I feel more socially in place.
I have tried bourbon whiskeys, quite a few of them. I like them. I like the sweeter sort of a taste that they carry in them.
I never really notice the pricing.
If I really want to get drunk, then it doesn't matter what the price, what the cost is of the drink. I will get drunk.
The only time I noticed the price was when I moved from Delhi to Bombay.
When the prices go up or when the prices go down, I do realize that.
I have tried bourbon whiskey. It tasted nice.
I definitely am more aware of premium brands now than before.
I have tried bourbon and American whiskey and I find it good.
I'm more aware of premium brands given that we have friends who give information and also at bars you get to know. And yes, I am willing to spend on them.
Bars and bartenders of the country believe that it's going to change soon though. Whiskey is just one category AB InBev is expanding into. Bud makers are soon to launch gin and vodka as well. Company launched its seltzers and energy drinks in a few markets. Seltzers are a packaged mix of alcohol and carbonated drink with different flavors. The launch of whiskey by AB InBev is part of their Beyond Beer strategy. The beer brewer is on a mission to become a full beverage company. But let's be honest, why is a beer company making hard spirits? And most importantly, why now, when the company has already established its leadership in the beer category? Is this strategy of Beyond Beer trying to tap into all consumer segments? Is AB InBev trying to become a household name? Let's ask the questions directly to the CMO of AB InBev India and understand the new strategy at play by the company. Why is beer manufacturing company suddenly entering the hard spirits market of India and especially whiskey?
Thank you so much, Shaburi, for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. Of course, we are the world's biggest beer manufacturer in India as well. And across the years, we have grown strength through strength in growing the beer category in India, right? And beer obviously remains our core focus. Our consumers today are experimentative. They are young millennials, Gen Zs who are trying about new things. And as a consumer-centric company, we want to make sure that we cater to those needs and choices that people have. We see that Indians are shifting towards premiumization. And that's where we saw with an advantage. We have a great brand with Budweiser, Magnum. We obviously see there's a growing category wanting to premiumize, wanting to experiment. And that's where we launched Magnum Double Barrel. This is a combination of American corn whiskey aged in Kentucky and finest Indian single malts aged in Goa. And that's what was the birth of Magnum Double Barrel. We are wanting to see categories which we can disrupt with our combined capabilities. We would want to launch a lot of new innovations across different categories, across different price points, both in the alcobev and the non-alcobev categories.
A couple of questions that come to my mind. You guys are trying to become a full beverage company, like you said, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, even energy drinks. You have launched Beats last year, right? Your Mike's Seltzer are also available in the country. So it's no longer just limited to alcoholic beverages only. My question is, why not double down on what your expertise is, which is beer? Why enter categories where you guys have never played at?
No, absolutely. And that's the right question to ask. We obviously thought about this very, very deliberately before launching or entering these categories as well. This is not just an India-only agenda. We have growing business of Beyond Beer internationally as well. Our Beyond Beer business is already touching close to around $2 billion. So it was a thought-through strategy globally. But in India as well, we choose segments where we believe we have a right point of view. We felt in a lot of events where Budweiser was present, our consumer was actually experimenting. They were not only drinking beer, they were drinking energy drinks, they were drinking whiskeys. And whiskey we chose very wisely. And whiskey is a huge market in India, one of the biggest categories in India. And we have chosen a category which is the blended whiskey segment. And here also there's a different price point that is operating. But we have picked up the premium blended whiskey segment. And herein also our offering was unique. We got this story of America meets India, which is what exactly is the Budweiser story. It's an American brand which has grown bigger and bigger in India in years. And herein we picked Shaburi with Magnum.
I understand that the company's strategy is obviously including more and more categories. So the one thing that is loud and clear for me is that AB InBev, for the first time ever since 2008, is trying to become a full beverage company. Now, two questions that come to my mind. Why and why now? And why choose India as the first market?
And first address your second question, actually, why India as the market, right? Because India is one of the fastest growing markets for us globally. And Budweiser India is the fifth largest market for us. If I put all the countries in the globe, Budweiser India's size is becoming much more meaningful. Second is brand health. So we are the most powerful beer brand in India. So it also gave us a license that if in the minds of a consumer, people are feeling this brand can command more, why restrict only to one category? And if your brand has the right creds to do it, that's why you will do a brand stretch. Otherwise, we could have very well launched a new brand altogether, right? Why would have extended Budweiser as a brand? So definitely India is on the cards. We are the only country across the globe to launch a blended American whiskey. And Budweiser Global has shown us a lot of confidence on India in particular to lead and learn. And of course, if this is a success, then this can travel across the globe. I mean, we don't want to say it's a success or a failure. We don't want to go there. But I think we are onto something. We want to just give it some time and it can travel. So I think we kind of did all this calibration and said that now is a great time. And of course, there are two different segments, right? One is a non-alcoholic segment, other is an alcoholic segment. And we are learning. I would not say all of them are hits or all of them are failures. That's how we thought about it.
Okay, why an American blended whiskey? Now, when we look at the data, American blended whiskey is negligible in the country. Honestly speaking, when we talk about whiskey drinking, and let's be very candid, right? If I'm talking about an expensive whiskey, I'm talking about single malts. The idea of premium American whiskey only sticks with two. Like the two brands that come to your mind is Jack Daniels and Jim Beam. Indians are just about developing the taste for bourbons or American whiskey. What I want to understand is that why American whiskey? What was the decision-making process for the AB InBev team that decided, okay, this is the category that we want to expand into?
The numbers are telling a story, right, of how this category has grown. You see a resurgence of, or I'll say a huge increase of gin category, right? We also saw a huge increase of tequila category coming in. So a lot of these categories which were not in the radar of people are now becoming the hotter and hotter properties. They were small, but growing at triple-digit growth year on year. And, whiskey is close to around 70-75% of the total spirits consumption in the country as well. So we know the love for whiskey. But so many brands mushroomed in the last 3 to 4 years, whether it's craft brands or whether it's offerings from the old legacy brands as well, that talked about newness. In the spirit of experimentation, I would also try out new brands. Plus, if the brand is familiar to me, like in our case, a Magnum beer is one of the most loved beers in the category, then I would want to give this brand a chance in the whiskey category, right? But we also saw that India has very nice distilleries, or it also has a lot of expertise in whiskey that we are learning and we are getting better year on year. So what we did, we have partnership with Sazerac. They're one of the biggest whiskey manufacturers across the globe. And they have an Indian subsidiary with JDPL. We kind of partnered with them. And we call it like marriage of two barrels. And that's why Magnum Double Barrel. One barrel comes from the American corn whiskey from Kentucky. The other barrel comes from Goa, in particular, the Indian single malt, which is actually matured in ex-bourbon casks. The magic starts first in the liquid, which is India and America come together, which is what this story is. We actually encourage people to experiment with our product because we believe we are so confident that our product will stand any experiment that our consumer loves to do, right?
American grain whiskey, blended whiskey, or Tennessee whiskey, Kentucky whiskey, bourbons, anything that you would like to call it, that category continues to be small. Now, educating the customers as to how to drink your whiskey is a big part of making them try the whiskey, right? Could you tell us a little bit about how you are doing that? Like, what are the on-trade practices that you guys are following, if at all? Or are you guys doing any events?
First, Shaburi, it's the premium blended whiskey category. Of course, it is not only a bourbon like the Jack Daniels and the other brands that you mentioned. This is a premium blended whiskey category. Of course, you're right. The other brands in the category, 100 Vipers, Jameson, even Johnny Walker, Red Label, right? A lot of these brands are either in similar pricing or have a similar liquid profile. We have a slew of plans over here, right? First and foremost, we know the brands in this category will be starting to build from the trade. Whether your product availability is at the right places, at the right, right people are holding you, or the right outlets are stocking you, right? So I think we have a big focus on the distribution part. First and foremost, my big lever is availability. Next in line, obviously, as you touched upon, is trials, right? We are big on cocktails. We are actually working with a lot of the on-trade partners to create new cocktails, create very customized cocktails for their outlets. Well, as I said in the process, some cocktails are working, some cocktails are not working. Secondly, we also have a lot of sampling happening in a straight serve as well. But liquid on lips, if I say as a strategy, is very, very important for us in the on-trade play as well. One big liquid on lips strategy, Shaburi, that we are trying to do is, and I'll break it into two parts, is events. And first, we are doing large-scale events. Supersonic is happening in Pune. Magnum whiskey is the exclusive whiskey over there that we are pouring. And that's where we also get a lot of leverage where Budweiser gets in. Automatically, we get an entry with whiskey. Secondly, we are also creating in Liquid on Lips, in events chapter, our own events. We want to drive a lot of Liquid on Lips. We want to build the brand the right way. And you mentioned some great brands, some amazing companies who operate in this segment. We're not competing, Shaburi, actually. As I said, I didn't want to make any market share proclamation. And, we believe we can open up the category. We want to win. We want to win with a certain segment. And, if the time is right, once we have tasted success in India, we will take it across the world as well.
It's interesting how while you're educating Indians about American whiskey, it also becomes the testing grounds for the success and entry of the same in other markets. AB InBev is trying to cash in on a growing preference for bourbons that bartenders believe started a few years before in India. Bars are an interesting place to experiment with your drinking habits. And bartenders believe Indians are more than ever aware of what they're drinking. Firstly, they're not drinking just to get high anymore. While the majority of the population perhaps is still drinking that way, and let's be honest, that section of the Indian consumer base will always exist and are the core volume driver. But the slightly more affluent and well traveled, well read consumer base are getting more and more curious about what kind of alcohol they're consuming. Our next guest has full faith in the bourbon rising story. Let's welcome Arijit Bose, celebrity bartender and vertical head of the countertop division of Third Eye Distillery, to learn how consumer preference are getting increasingly driven by curiosity and awareness. So, before we begin, let's start with a simple one, right? Are you a whiskey drinker?
I drink everything. Like, given the line of work that I am in, I do consume my fair amount of cocktails. I do like my wines. There are times that I can't do without beer. And there are amazing times in the day or a day in the month or a month in a year that nothing except a whiskey can calm that day down. And it changes from which whiskey I would drink. My favorite bourbon currently, because again, a very difficult choice to make. Currently, it's the one called Blanton's. Interesting trivia, it's been part of the John Wick movies. Like every John Wick movie, whenever you see them have a bourbon, it's always the Blanton's. It's got a nice little, like a Kentucky Derby horse up top, and the bourbon's just beautiful.
Wow, those are some interesting brands. So, for you, what is it about the bourbon whiskey or Kentucky whiskey or any kind of American whiskey? What is the flavor profile that stands out for you when, as compared to other whiskeys that Indians tend to drink a lot?
I mean, see, India is a very tricky place, right? Whenever you talk about whiskey, and I would preface all my conversation by saying that India drinks a lot of whiskey. I'm going to limit it to the part of whiskey industry where it's the premium, super premium bourbons imported, which are making a lot of difference in the market as well and slowly seeping into tier two. So that's how I would mostly talk about it. Now, why do I like bourbons? I got into bourbon simply because of its mixability, right? How I was attracted into it, because back in the day in India, we did not have a lot of bourbons. We maybe had Jim Beam, we had a Tennessee, which was Jack Daniels, but Jack Daniels is not amazing in cocktails, right? I'd much rather have Jack Daniels with Coke or on its own. They have a lot of variants that you can enjoy in a mixable format. But Jim Beam was something which was like a workhorse, right? The pricing was perfect and you could use it in a number of cocktails without it being overpowering. And it did not affect the guests too much because if you price the drink right, they were willing to go for it, right? And if I wanted to make a really good old fashioned, it is bourbon that you needed. And then there was this other fad that was there, which is the pickleback, which was either Jameson or bourbons that we would follow with homemade pickle juice. So, I mean, between those three, we really got into bourbons and started enjoying bourbon on its own. Barrel aging is the part of it, right? Like as soon as whiskey is aged in a new oak barrel, those nice coconutty notes, those vanilla, everything comes in and it's not overtly fruity or does not have all of those natures. It's a little bit more nuanced. So I tended to gravitate a little bit more towards bourbon. It was less complicated for me. Enjoyed that a lot more. And as I went into the whole path of learning about bourbons, their labeling, the story, history, everything was just intrigued me, right? So hence my love for bourbons.
So can we assume that those two are the most popular whiskey cocktails ordered by Indian consumers at a bar?
100%. But interesting history though, back in the day, right? I've been in the industry for 20 years. But when I moved into the whole whiskey genre, it was super interesting that in Delhi and other places, a whiskey sour and old fashioned were essentially the same thing with or without the egg, right? That's where we used to be up till about 2011 also, I think, right? Very few bars in India really knew the difference of old fashioned being made with Angustura Beta, sugar, and bourbon, and whiskey sour being lime, sugar, and egg white going in, right? But yeah, I would agree with you that a whiskey sour and old fashioned are the absolute best in bourbon cocktails. Manhattan comes a close third.
That is a very interesting tidbit that you shared with us. Quickly, do you think, or rather from your experience, have you noticed a lot of consumers walking in and when they ask for a whiskey cocktail, are they particular about the brand or the kind of whiskey that they choose as well? Or is it something that is mostly, decided by the bar or the bartender? How does that work?
most menus will have whiskey cocktails, and so they know what they're using. Some of it is sometimes led by brand tie-ups that they have, but overall bartenders do know what they're using and why they're using it. So when guest looks at a menu, he's just looking for a whiskey cocktail, right? Like if he wants to have a cocktail, his key requirement is usme whiskey hona chahiye. So then you can work with it, and there are a few questions that you'll ask them is whether they want something sweet sour, or they want something spirit forward. Now, people who know their drinks or their cocktails, once they have had it, then they are willing to experiment, right? In Goa, however, I mean, what we have noticed, a lot of people do come in asking for Indian made spirits, and you have Paul John here. Can you make something with Paul John, or can you make something with Jim Beam that's now bottled here? That happens all the time. So I would say it's like a 80-20 split. 80 is people go with what the bartenders are willing to offer. 20 of them will know brands and stuff that they want to use in their cocktail. So sometimes names or brands or a style of whiskey will trigger a want. So happens all the time.
And has this percentage of 20%, like you said, those who are asking for the particular brand, grown over the years? Do you think that this is getting even more and more common for consumers to walk in and be like, hey, I want a cocktail?
100%. Whenever we do a menu, we have to make sure that there are a legitimate number of whiskey cocktails in there. You cannot not work with it. And as bartenders, we like using it because whiskey's got a lot of character. We will use vodka to keep guests happy, but we like using stuff like whiskey, tequila, bourbon because they have character. They don't disappear in a cocktail. You feel the spirit, right? You get to enjoy what the producer has done. So consumers have gone that direction, and that 20% is slowly increasing more and more, right? People are getting particular about what they want in their particular drink. If I've got a better bourbon to offer, they will go for it, right? For example, we used to make costings work, we were using a lot of Jim Beam, but as soon as we got Wild Turkey in our shelves and people saw it, they were like, listen, can I have an old fashioned with that? Or can I have a whiskey highball with that? And we are more than happy to serve it, right? Then you have stuff like the Japanese ones, a Toki. A lot of guys would not want to mix their Toki with other stuff, but they are willing to have a Toki highball as long as you make it perfect, the ice is right. So that is increasing it. I'm saying 20%, but easily 30-40% going in as far as whiskey drinks are concerned.
It's interesting. You've touched upon something that I wanted to also ask you. Have you seen that Indian consumers are moving more towards premium whiskeys or, slightly more expensive whiskeys? Because like you said, when we talk about whiskey in India, yes, 60% of the volume is driven by whiskey in hard spirits, but it's all McDowell's and, Royal Stags of the world, which has our own consumer cohort of its own. There's no denying it. But has there been an increase in the premium and the super premium whiskeys when consumer is walking into a bar?
Oh, 100%. If you look at the number of brands which are in the market, a lot of people don't give them credit, but the distributors in the market, they have got a lot more educated and knowledgeable. So they are pulling in a lot more brands. The big brands like a Bacardi, a Diageo, they are pulling in liquid. If you look at what they're doing with the craft industry, right? Whether you look at Godawan, whether you look at the Piccadilly guys making Indri, Paul John, Amrut, the reason all of this is happening is because there's the demand in the market, right? And that pie is increasing more and more. Yes, people are drinking the Blender's Pride, right? Their parents are still drinking it, whoever wants it, or even a Red Label at home now. Red Label is no longer considered premium. It's considered sub-premium, right? Because of the way the market has evolved. Great whiskey nonetheless, but you would never be seen having it outside at a bar. You are okay to have it. If you're somebody who drinks 2 drinks in a day, you're okay to have all of this. But a massive amount of the crowd, of the target audience that we are talking about, who are okay to drink above the 1,000 to 2,000, 3,000, they are willing to buy this. And the reason you see more brands coming in because there's a market for it. All the stuff that the brands have done before and moving up from maybe a Duos 12 to a Johnny Walker, or you look at all of the stuff that's there in the market now, there is a definite increase. As much as people would not like to agree, the gin boom also helped. The gin boom kind of pushed a lot of guys to experiment with their with the kind of things that they were drinking, right? Which also meant that a lot of producers felt there was chances that if I produce something, I'll find my audience for it and build from there. So there are more number of these premium category whiskeys which are coming in, and nobody's trying to do the whole IMFL format anymore. People are still doing it. But what was the IMFL format? You were trying to make a whiskey, sell it at the best price possible. But the only way to maximize profit on that is to cut corners on what whiskey you were using, what the source was, etc., 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 right? That was the only way. That's the IMFL format of making money. Now what's happening is people know that if you value the raw ingredient, value the producer, value production methods, you do a nice label, good bottle, you will find your crowd for it. And people are willing to pay the money. So that is a big change. Now innovation is becoming big. And what we were talking about, the double barrel, right? This stuff has existed. The Scotch guys were very good at doing it in terms of marketing. They knew their double aging, double barrel, sherry, whether they want to do Solera, all of that existed, right? Now all other categories are learning from them. This has happened in Taiwan with Kavalan. It's happened in Australia and Sullivan's Cove and whiskies like that. And now in India, people are playing with barrels, right? That's nothing more than innovation play. So I think even the AB InBev play of the Magnum double barrel is super interesting, right? It gives nice little nuances. And I'm glad they're learning from other whiskey companies to kind of bring it into India. So you will see a lot more of this happening.
Quick question. So, what's the normal or what's the go to, I should say, pouring brand for any kind of whiskey cocktails in India? Also, what's the average cocktail price like for a whiskey cocktail?
It's an expansive question. What I'll do is I'll pick up brands which are easily available in all markets, right? So when I say all markets, I'm looking at Bombay, Bangalore, Goa, Delhi. So it's usually the bigger brands who have been able to proliferate and all bars have it. Now, when I answer that question, it also depends on what level of bars are we talking about, right? So there's A, B, and C. A will be the lighthouse accounts or the nice accounts that you will go to, right? Like places like Sideka, Home Bar. In Bombay, it's Bombay Canteen, Americano. So their level of alcohol that they use is very different. Then you have the B and C restaurants and bars where you're probably expecting a drink for 400, 500 rupees. So those guys would use a lot of the Indian stuff that's available. We have seen Blender's Pride and Royal Challenge being used for drinks. So at those levels, that's fine. But the moment you say old fashioned, they will move up to a Jim Beam. Now, all the other bars, they are more particular about the style of whiskey that they're using, A level and a B level. So there you will see a lot more bourbon being poured. So bourbon is the workhorse. That's the one everyone ends up using. A special change in that also is because Jim Beam is now bottled in India. So they have been able to get a better price format and they're giving that price value or that costing value to bars. So if I make a old fashioned, I don't need to sell it at 800. I can sell it at about a 500, 600 and still make money for the bar. However, if people do want to go aside from that, Jameson and Red Label are really, really big. I know everyone loves calling Jameson Irish whiskey, but Jameson has transcended that, right? Jameson itself is a category of its own, though it's Irish whiskey. But Jameson is also part of Pernod Ricard. So they have been able to get good contract deals and spread it out in the market. And it's a bartender favorite brand. So a lot of it does get used in cocktails. And because of the price benefit that they get, they are able to pass that value on to consumers. Monkey Shoulder was big in the whole mixability campaign over the last 3-4 years. They went super cool and they were the first guys, though it was late from rest of the world. Monkey Shoulder were the first guys who properly started talking about non-age statement, right? If you look at the bottle, there's no age. And the way they did that was they made it favorable for a younger audience, but you could have it on the rocks as well. It's a blend of really good whiskeys. But what they did with their brand ambassador and the campaign was amazing, right? They pushed their drinks from a penicillin. If you wanted a pina colada with a Monkey Shoulder, they were making it. If you wanted an old fashioned, it was available. And William Grant's really pushed on that. And I think it was a major part of educating the Indian producers on what could be done. If I want to do fun stuff, Jameson is the easiest one to go for. So that's how whiskey kind of gets used up in the market.
Thank you for that. That was super interesting. Quickly, when it comes to categorization, not brands, like when a consumer walks into a bar, more often than not, at least in my experience, I've heard Indians speak about single malts with a certain amount of, reverence, like, oh, it's a single malt. It's these many years old. And they like flaunting it. They like serving it. It's all about that, right? I haven't heard that about American whiskey or any kind of Tennessee whiskey or Kentucky whiskey or bourbons, right? Now, is categorization picking up in India? Are consumers aware how different an American whiskey is from a single malt? Is the education and awareness?
Consumers know their They are traveling a lot. There is enough resource available online. The kind of communication which is going on, even people like Dram Club that exists. So they are having their own whiskey sessions, carrying stuff back. And even if they can't taste it, they're at least talking about it. Whereas back when I got into the industry until about 10, 11 years, we only knew Indian whiskeys, they were affordable. अगर शादी पे जाएंगे तो वहाँ black label या Shivers पियेंगे. But single malt, somebody pulls out, they must really love you, right? Single malt is aspirational. You have kind of arrived, right? So that's where we were. What single malt did really, really well is what they educated the clients and talking about it. You became the custodian of the single malt and you were selling it. You were a mini brand ambassador, but that's all people knew. But over time, because people are traveling and the NAS whiskeys came about, which is a non-age statement, right? Or the barrel age statement, where people started not talking about age, but more about characteristics or how it was produced, how the particular distiller or a blender was getting involved, right? That became interesting. If you think about the Balvenie, right? The Balvenie 14 is a Caribbean cask. Now, those three words together make you sound like a super nerd, right? You can win a room the moment you walk in with that bottle. So people are getting into categorization. People knew that stuff were aged for 10 years, 12 years. Now they like to know what kind of barrel was used. We constantly get asked, like, how do you identify between a bourbon barrel or a French oak or a cognac barrel or whatever, or a wine barrel, right? Like a Cabernet Sauvignon barrel or whatever. So we have to give them small notes and tips that, if you drink this, you get this flavor, you can kind of guess that comes from a bourbon barrel. That's why all the brands are talking about what kind of barrels which are being used. When I've come back to India, I see a lot of people who know this stuff and they're asking for it. And that's why people are talking about it, right? Whether you look at a Godawan, whether you look at what's happening with this brand called Indri, right? Indri almost talks more about the aging than they talk about the barley. It's a great story. So categorization is there. Bourbon, I know everyone feels people don't talk about bourbon, but bourbon is spoken for a lot more outside India than inside India. And it's slowly coming in, right? And it's already happening. You will see more and more appreciation of it. So people who are drinking scotches, they are willing to move towards bourbon once in a while or have a bourbon cocktail and then come back to the scotch, which is good enough, which is the foot in the door.
So are you saying that we are at that phase of whiskey drinking where we can see the dawn and the rise of bourbons in India?
Oh, 100%. I've been shouting it from the roofs for the last 2 years. It's been a little bit slow on the uptake, but more and more bars are going for it. And cocktail culture is a big part of it as well. People are pushing through, like a well-made Manhattan and a cigar just goes, it can replicate every emotion that a good scotch will give you. 3 more things actually. Bacardi is going to eventually get down this thing called Angel's Envy. If you can get your hands on a bottle, do that. It's really good bourbon.
Okay.
Then there is a company called High West that makes a Campfire. It's a blend of bourbon, rye, and peaty whiskey.
Okay.
So if you ever get a chance on your travels, pick up that bottle. And since you said Delhi, there was this event I had done for Dalmore and White and McKay in 2005. That the last time I stepped into Delhi Gymkhana, we were supposed to do a tasting for 60 people. I had set up all the glasses and I had backup. At 6 o'clock dot, 150 people walked into that place like a zombie movie. They took a Dalmore 21 and a Isle of Jura, mixed it into a White and McKay 13 or whatever it was and had it in one shot. So our tasting got over in 15 minutes. One of the best days of my life. I learned whiskey properly that day.
Now, I genuinely feel like trying some bourbons. I mean, a legit bartender is endorsing it. While Indians learn more and more about American whiskeys, one thing is for sure, the categorization of this market is on its way. The Indian whiskey market is over 200 million cases, according to Alcobev research company IWSR Drinks Market Analysis. Out of this total market size, 2.6% is contributed by Scotch, 0.1% by US whiskey and Irish whiskey each, an almost negligible contribution by the Japanese and Canadian whiskey. And Indian whiskeys contributed 97.3% of the total market size. While the numbers tell a story of Indians loving their Indian whiskey, importers believe that this is changing amongst the top 2% of the population. Basically, those who can afford better and in all likelihood are choosing better. Our next guest is here to tell us how this change is on its way. Keshav Prakash, founder and curator of the Walt Fine Home Bar, has been very busy. He's the man behind the upcoming Home Bar Festival by the Walt, to be held on February 25th and 26th in Mumbai. So, before we jump right into the questions, and do you enjoy whiskey? Do you enjoy your bourbon?
Absolutely. I do. In fact, I had many visits to the Bourbon County in the US, in Kentucky. There are a couple of smaller batch bourbons out there. And what you've seen of lately is similar to the gin wave and the new breed of Scottish distilleries, craft distilleries that are coming up. But I've enjoyed sipping quite a few bourbon whiskeys out there.
The questions that come to my mind is that when it comes to whiskey in India, how big is the current market?
Historically, whiskey has been the emperor of categories in India. It is very aspirational, and the growing middle class, when they cross over from whatever they're drinking, beer and other lighter spirits, to whiskey, it is a definitive crossover. Right. Whiskey, I think the market itself is a humongous, a whopping 200 plus million case market across all categories of whiskey. And what you're seeing, I think, in the last 5 years, the CAGR has been kind of steady at 3%, which is quite a bit for such a large market. In 2020-21, I think it grew a whopping 17%. That is the kind of growth we are seeing in India currently.
So, according to you, like amongst the imported whiskies, which were the leading top brands for 2022? And why do you think that these brands were preferred by consumers? Has this changed drastically pre and post pandemic?
Yeah, India is a Scotch market, and that will take a long time for it to go away. With, the blended drink categories, Johnny Walker Red, Black, Chivas, really out there in the front, followed by the single malt categories of Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, Talisker. So a lot of international epic brands like Jim Beam being bottled in India and taking away a huge, actually it's creating a new market, for bottled in India categories. That kind of dovetails between the IMFL category and the imported whiskey category that's so expensive. And suddenly you have this whole BII range, which is, I think, garnering a lot of market share.
Understood. Another thing that I wanted to touch upon was during the pandemic, there was a lot of issues with the import business, right? Like during that time, when there were operational issues going on during the pandemic, what were Indians drinking?
Very sadly, it took a pandemic, but it was serendipity for a lot of small players. Because what it did was, as more and more home entertainment started kind of becoming the new norm, because of pandemic, people preferred to stay at home. And they did not want to entertain, themselves or their guests with otherwise standard regular drinks that they would very often call the retailer and have delivered. What was suffering or what was missing during that time was discoverability. Pandemic made these consumers call the retailers and ask for something special. And that meant all these unusual small ultra premium brands, craft brands, all of them mushroomed. And suddenly the consumer realized that until now, they were just settling for the standard quick phone call brands they knew. Either they had discovered during their travel, retail, duty-free visits, or whatever the retailer would rattle off, 10-second time years for a phone call. When they went to retail store, what they thought was a good brand to pick up. But due to the shortage, the market had to flush out. What they had was their ultra premium, small batch, those range. So it was solid, nice time for these kind of smaller brands to be discovered. And that's what has happened.
Were there any brands in particular, so amongst the new age brands, the smaller brands that you're talking about, which benefited from the pandemic? There are any brands that we should know of who also play in the American grain whiskey category or bourbons for that matter?
Yeah, I think you have brands like Maker's Mark, Woodford Reserve, Buffalo Trace, Sazerac, which is US whiskey, Elijah Craig. These are the kind of brands that, specific to US whiskey that have come out in the market.
And have consumers gone back to those brands now that things have settled down, now that we don't have operational issues anymore?
Absolutely. What you're seeing here is that the key consumer of whiskey across its various categories remain the younger kind of the urban consumers, right? You've also seen a lot more brands coming into the market. You will see a lot more experimentation amongst this consumer set going forward. We spoke about AB InBev coming up with their new expressions and the new style of serving that whiskey. And that is what I think is interesting to look out for.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the market is growing? Have Indian consumers developed a finer palate to distinguish between different categories of whiskey? And how are Indians consuming bourbons?
While the pandemic saw a boom in home entertainment, it also gave birth to mixology, DIY kits, and other aspects not directly related to the bottled product. So more and more Indians are now getting into cocktail making and experimenting. And this is what I think will be the way forward when it comes to addressing the earlier millennials who are now entered the drinking age. And they no longer want to drink whiskey traditionally like, say, the dads and the granddads did. So what you will see is a lot more experimentation, a lot more fun. What you call the snobbiness of whiskey will soon give way to the cool factor.
India dethroned France in terms of Scotch imports from UK in 2022. This definitely shows our preference towards whiskey. The imports of Scotch from UK by India increased by 60% in 2022. India imported Scotch worth $279 million during the first 8 months of FY23. This was a big jump compared to the total imports of the same for the entire year of FY22, which was $199 million. IWSR's Drink Market Analysis reports the leading brand continues to be Diageo's McDowell's Indian Whiskey, followed by Pernod Ricard's Imperial Blue, and Allied Blenders and Distilleries owned Officer's Choice. The road ahead for AB InBev is not without challenges. Our guests have established the fact that Indians are definitely moving towards experimenting with their whiskies more and more. However, if we take a hard look at the numbers, AB InBev has a steep hill to climb. Magnum Double Barrel is an American grain whiskey, which is not so popular a whiskey category in India. Also, it is priced in the premium category. The current share of US whiskeys continues to be a mere 0.1% of the total 200 plus million cases market size of India. In addition to that, premiumization is driving the Alcobev sales strongly over the last 3 years, and it's here to stay. Consumers will continue to drink better. Magnum Double Barrel is priced at 2,449 rupees for a 750 ml in Karnataka. This new American whiskey is priced marginally below Amrut and Paul John's single malt variants. The biggest challenge for AB InBev is not convincing Indians to try something new, but to try something new at a premium price. All the while, when the consumer is aware, an additional spend of a mere 300 to 400 rupees will allow them to buy a single malt. And if the India-UK FTA for Alcobev is approved, where there are talks to reduce the customs duty from 150% to 50% in phases, we can expect deep slashing of prices for all imported Alcobev from UK. This will make the imported single malts cheaper too. That is a very, very difficult challenge to be up against. AB InBev chose India as the first market to experiment with this new launch, as India is one of its top 5 markets globally for beer. Will India continue to be a star performer for them in the whiskey category too? What AB InBev is attempting to do is not new. Brewers in US have been experimenting with distilling whiskey for the last couple of years. A few such examples are Dogfish Head Breweries, founded in 1995 and acquired by Boston Beer Company in 2019. In a $300 million deal, launched its American single malt whiskey called Let's Get Lost in 2021. There are other American brewers doing the same as well. Founded in 1996, Michigan-based New Holland Brewing Company started distilling whiskey, rum, and gin in 2005 and selling the same in 2008 and are still doing it. Clearly, it's a strategy which works if the product is right. Does AB InBev have that? Honestly, it's too soon to tell. We will have to wait and see if India responds to Magnum Double Barrel in a successful way or not. But being successful with a whiskey brand in India takes time and massive volume sales. Will this brand extension be the answer to AB InBev's new ambition of becoming an all-beverage brand? Only time will tell. You have been listening to The Business of Whiskey on The Morning Brief, brought to you by The Economic Times, and a big thanks to our guests Vineet, Keshav, and Arijit. A shout out to the team that helped put the episode together. Producer Sumit Pandey, sound designer Rajas Nayak, executive producers Anupriya Nair, Anirban Chaudhary, and Arijit Barman. Do like and share the episode and follow us on your favorite podcast platform to make sure you don't miss an episode. The Morning Brief is streaming on Amazon Prime Music and JioSaavn, apart from Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. And of course, ET's own audio platform, ET Play. Do tune into ET Play, our latest platform for all audio content. Thank you for listening in. Have a great weekend ahead.